Jimmy Butler trade watch is officially underway as it seems like a Butler deal could come to fruition over the next 48 to 72 hours. I am Nic Rohloff. This is the Heat Report by Chat Sports. We're going to break down everything revolving Jimmy Butler trade talks on today's episode. And it all kind of get put into motion when 30 minutes before the Heat Blazers game on Tuesday evening, this report from Sham Charania came out about the Phoenix Suns trading their unprotected 2031 first-round pick to the Utah Jazz for 3 first-rounders, the least favorable of Cleveland and Minnesota in 2025, 27, and 29. So probably mid-20s to high 20 picks there returning to Phoenix, but that now allows them to trade those 3 first-round picks in a deal. They only had 1 tradable first-round pick, the very valuable 2031 pick, but they needed more ammunition rather than just 1 golden bullet. And Sam Amick of The Athletic kind of reported that things are starting to get put into motion, and anybody kind of with half a brain knew that things were starting to get put more into motion after that trade from Phoenix, because they don't make that deal unless they know that they are going to use those 3 picks to potentially get Jimmy Butler in a blockbuster. And you see here from the report from Sam Amick, there's rising optimism that there is getting closer and closer to having Jimmy reach his destination of Phoenix after this trade. And before we talk more about everything surrounding Butler and the Miami Heat, make sure you're following me on Twitter/X, because when a Jimmy Butler trade actually goes down, I will break the news on my Twitter. At Nic_Rohloff is the handle, and then we'll come here and make a video and go live on the channel. Well, give me a follow. I'm talking Heat every single day, post Heat highlights as well. I'm a pretty good follow, and get the news first over on my Twitter. I've made this prediction. I made it last night. I made it on our live show last night as well. I think this Jimmy Butler saga comes to an end this week. It has been a very tumultuous couple of weeks, really ever since the Christmas kind of report that he is preferring a trade from the Miami Heat. It sounds more and more likely that this is going to end this week. I think after this trade that Phoenix made, it looks more and more likely that they are going to use those 3 first-round picks to trade them to the Heat and maybe a 3rd or 4th team, kind of help facilitating this deal to help sweeten the package they are getting. It just makes the most sense that the Suns make this deal on one of the most valued picks in the entire NBA draft future of the 2031 first round. I know it's crazy to say that, but everyone expects Phoenix to not be good at that time. So when you do that, you are projecting that Suns pick to be in the top 5, top 10 potentially, and it's why it's so valued. So they trading that pick to get 3 more signifies a trade could be very, very soon. And are you with me? Are you under the belief that Jimmy Butler will be traded this week away from the Miami Heat roster? Let me know your thoughts down in the comment section. Will Jimmy Butler be traded before Sunday? Type Y for yes or type N for no. It's today's pinned comment, so you get hit with a YouTube ad break. Scroll down, let it play, and answer the question. I do think it gets done, but there is still a part of me that is concerned about the Bradley Beal aspect of this multi-team trade. Because there could be 4, there could be 5 teams that come together, agree on everything, right? Oh, we'll take Bradley Beal in a first. The Heat are fine with the expiring contracts they get back in the draft capital. But Bradley Beal can just be like, yeah, that team that you send me to, I'm not going to go there. I'm making my no-trade clause be known. And next thing you know, well, there is no deal, and now everyone's scrambling to see if they can find a different type of package where Beal goes to a destination he'd like. So that is still a concern. And even though I think a trade is going to happen very, very soon, it may not be today, or at least it may not be as soon as we think, because Marc Stein did report that sources told him that as of Tuesday night, Bradley Beal has not been presented any trade scenarios for him to consider and tell them he would be willing to waive his no-trade clause. And remember, as I said, he needs to sign off on any potential deal that goes down. So if you are going to think about when a trade could potentially happen, I think we'll start to finally see it either happen when there is a report about Bradley Beal being approached about a potential trade. Because until Beal is asked about his no-trade clause on if he's willing to waive it to go to that team that would be willing to take on his 3 years remaining salary at $50+ million, well, then there's really nothing to talk about that much here. But there is a conversation to be had about what teams could ultimately take in Bradley Beal, and Beal willing to waive his no trade clause for that team. Well, it's been kind of speculated over the past month or so that if Beal was traded, there would be a small handful of teams that he would be willing to waive his no trade clause for. The 5 teams that have been speculated for Beal to waive his NTC: the Milwaukee Bucks, Chicago Bulls, Miami Heat, Los Angeles Lakers, and the Denver Nuggets. But we can start to kind of eliminate teams from this list, right? Miami clearly does not want Bradley Beal, so take them off the list. They're not taking back that contract. I think the Denver Nuggets can be eliminated from this list as well. Yeah, maybe he would help Jamal Murray in that backcourt, but I don't think they're going to put themselves in that kind of cap-binding situation and move by taking on Beal. And I don't really think the Lakers would make sense to get Bradley Beal either. They need more defense and shooting, and I don't think Beal provides that. So to me, the 2 teams at the top are the ones that I'm looking at: the Milwaukee Bucks and the Chicago Bulls. They interest me. And I think the Milwaukee Bucks have been the most linked team to Bradley Beal. And if you go back actually to when Beal was traded from Washington to Phoenix, it was reported after the fact that it was very close to happening where Beal was going to Milwaukee before they traded for Dame, and ultimately could have had a Beal-Giannis duo with Chris Middleton and company. And the reason why Chicago interests me as well is Billy Donovan, the Bulls head coach, was Bradley Beal's coach at Florida, where he attended college. So there could be at least some intrigue of Beal rejoining the Chicago Bulls. And in that potential deal where he goes to Chicago, I think Zach LaVine would ultimately be moved as well in that multi-team deal, and maybe he ends up in Milwaukee, because I don't think Miami really wants to take on that contract as well. So those are the 2 teams I'm looking at to take on Bradley Beal. And coming up in just a second, I'm actually going to give my official trade projection in what 2 trade packages I'm looking at to get this done over the next 3 or 4 days. But before we get into that, I do have to tell you about our sponsor on today's show, and that is Prize Picks, the #1 daily fantasy sports platform. I play Prize Picks on a daily basis. It's so easy. All you do is pick more or less on 2 or more player stat projections, and you can actually win up to 1,000 times your cash. Check out the promos tab, by the way, to tell any of our Super Sweat Millie winners big game lineups. The big game is just 2 or 3 weeks away, and if you tell a lineup that goes 3 for 3, you can actually win a split of $1 million in promo funds. Prize Picks offers so many different promos, one of them being Taco Tuesday. Each Tuesday, Prize Picks discounts select player projections up to 25% to provide even more value for your lineups, and they give away free entries as well. For example, for this upcoming weekend in professional football, Jaden Daniels, a free square, more than half a passing yard. You pair that up with any other stat projections, and you can win real cash. I'm going aggressive with more than on Terry McLaurin and A.J. Brown. I think both of them find the end zone this week, and I can make a pretty nice chunk of change using my sports knowledge this upcoming weekend. So join me and the millions of others playing Prize Picks on a daily basis. Download the app today and use code CLNS to get $50 instantly after you play your first $5 lineup. One more time, download the app, use code CLNS to get $50 instantly after you play your first $5 lineup. Prize Picks, run your game. All right, let's get back to Jimmy Butler trade talks, and I want to look at 2 trade projections that could happen for Butler if this ultimately does come to a resolution over the next couple of days. I think the most likely trade involves 4 teams. Maybe it gets opened up to a 5-team deal, but I think it's most likely going to be a 4-team trade. I think it's obviously going to include Miami. It's going to include Phoenix. I think Milwaukee is ultimately going to be that 3rd team. It's all about who is going to be that 4th team to help facilitate this deal. And I think it's either going to be the Detroit Pistons or the Toronto Raptors. And I have a couple of trade projections, one that includes the Raptors and one that includes the Pistons. We'll start with the Detroit Pistons one because that's actually the one that I think is more likely out of the 2 if you're asking me. And in this 4-team deal, Phoenix uses all 3 first-round picks they just acquired from the Utah Jazz. One goes to Milwaukee. That is where Bradley Beal ultimately goes because I think the Bucks could be interested in him. Plus, he would waive his no-trade clause. So the Bucks get Beal and a first-round pick in 2025. The Heat get Chris Middleton and Bobby Portis from the Milwaukee Bucks, plus the other 2 first-round picks from the trade the Suns made with the Utah Jazz. And in order for this trade to happen, the Bucks would need to get underneath the second apron so they can aggregate contracts to Miami. They get underneath the second apron by sending Pat Connaughton to Detroit, plus a second-round pick to incentivize the Pistons to take on his deal, who has only got 1 year left. So this is a 4-team deal I could see coming to fruition, very honestly. And if I'm going to be even more honest, I don't hate that trade offer and potential package for the Miami Heat. You get 2 first-round picks, although they are the least favorable of either Minnesota or Cleveland in 27-29, which are projected to likely be in the mid-20s. But the news is those 2 picks coming into Miami would unlock your ability to make even more trades with draft capital. Your amount of picks you can trade in the first round right now is 1 in the season. In the offseason, it becomes 2. But if you make that deal, you can start to offer 4, 3 first-round picks in any trade, which makes it more likely for you to be able to acquire a disgruntled star that becomes available with some of the young players you already have. And I don't think the contracts you would be getting back are that bad either. When you think of the 2 players in that deal, Chris Middleton, Bobby Portis, I think their contracts are very favorable for Miami. They're under contract, obviously, for the remainder of this season, but next year is very much in the air. Both of them have player options, Middleton for $34 million, Bobby Portis for $13.4 million. I would actually project Bobby Portis to opt out of that because I think he could get a multi-year deal at $15 million plus potentially from a team looking for his services, so that could become an expiring. If not, it's a $13.4 million expiring next year. Chris Middleton's intriguing. I think there is a chance he opts in to that $34 million deal. In worst case scenario, he does. You have a $34 million expiring in 25-26 that could be used as a trade chip in the offseason this year or next season during the deadline as well. And if they both opt in and you both don't trade them, like I mentioned, they are expirings, and the Heat will still have that flexibility they desire for the 2026 offseason before the 26-27 season. So to me, those are 2 contracts that make a lot of sense for Miami. And we're going to get to that other trade projection here in just a second, but I do want to make sure you guys are subscribed to the channel. Stay locked in here with the Heat Report because when Jimmy Butler gets traded, we will go live to break it down, react, and talk with all of you guys in the live chat. So hit that sub button. We'll have you covered leading up to that inevitable trade going down as well. Let's get into the other trade that I think could happen. This is the second trade option. This one includes the Toronto Raptors. It's relatively similar, but it does require some movement on some other teams. Like the Suns still just get Jimmy. The Heat still get a couple first-round picks and Chris Middleton. But if Toronto jumps in on this, they actually trade Bruce Brown's expiring $23 million contract to Miami. And it is kind of being reported that the Heat would be willing to take on Bruce Brown. But in order to take on both Middleton and Brown, the Heat would need to trade more than just Jimmy Butler away to make salaries work. Alec Burks and Haywood Highsmith could be casualties. Burks is a veteran who doesn't get a lot of PT for Miami. Highsmith just got replaced by Khalil Ware in the starting lineup, so it makes sense there. Toronto then receives Pat Connaughton, Bobby Portis, Highsmith, and a 2031 second-round pick. And the Bucks get that Alec Burks player as well as Beal and that first-round pick. So similar, just a couple of different kind of moves there between Bruce Brown, Bobby Portis, Haywood Highsmith, Alec Burks. And this would obviously land Bruce Brown in Miami rather than Bobby Portis alongside Chris Middleton. And Bruce Brown's an interesting guy. He is someone that is very similar to Jaime Jaquez Jr. in my opinion, to where he can play the 2, he can play the 3. He doesn't really create that well. He's a spotty 3-point shooter. He is a good defender and a good productive winning type basketball player. But he doesn't really add much to this Heat roster that Jaime Jaquez Jr. can't do for you already right now. So when you think of Brown, it's a little tough. And he's had an injury history ever since leaving Denver. I mean, he's only played in 10 games this season for the Toronto Raptors, and he was injured most of last season as well. So that's also a concern. The only reason why I would be intrigued with acquiring Bruce Brown is because of that $23 million contract that is going to be expiring after this year. So you would get $23 million guaranteed coming off the books. No player option like Middleton and Portis. That is a straight coming off the books. So you'd have a lot of flexibility going into the future, but as well as this offseason to potentially sign some free agents if you wanted to. All right, we showed you 2 trade projections, in my opinion, that could land Jimmy in Phoenix. This is the one that features Detroit, Middleton, and Portis, plus 2 first-round picks. And then the second one with the Toronto Raptors that gets Bruce Brown and Chris Middleton in Miami with a 27 and 2029 first-round pick. Let me know which trade you prefer, the first one that includes Detroit or the second one that includes Toronto. I'm actually going to be typing my ones. I think I prefer the Chris Middleton and Bobby Portis deal. And I get the ideal and the attraction of the Bruce Brown $23 million expiring contract, but I think Portis would help this team right now. And if the goal is to make the postseason this year, so you trade your 25 and your 27 first-round picks rather than that getting pushed back to 26 and 28, I think Portis would help that. You could slide Chris Middleton into the 3. Your starting lineup could then include Hero, Duncan Robinson, Middleton, Bam, Kelal Ware, and then have Nikola Jovic and Bobby Portis as your 2 guys coming off the bench in your front court. To me, I think that's the most ideal. You get the 2 first-round picks. They could opt out of their player option, and they're both expiring contracts for Miami this offseason, or they both opt in. They're expiring next year, or could be valuable trade pieces as well. I think it's a win-win for Miami, and at this stage in the process of the Jimmy Butler trade rumors and talks, I think Portis, Middleton, and 2 first-rounders is as good as it's going to get. And who knows? Maybe the Heat can take that trade that they do, if they do it in the next couple of days, and look to make some other moves before the deadline, because we still got a couple weeks until the February 6th NBA trade deadline. You never know, folks. Which is why you need to stay subscribed, because we'll have you covered with everything. We're obviously covering the Jimmy Butler stuff very heavily right now. But if that trade happens or doesn't happen, we'll also look at other moves Miami could make with Terry Rozier before that deadline. So make sure you're subscribed. Make sure you lock us in here at the Heat Report.